American Exceptionalism and American Innocence, a People's History of Fake News from the Revolutionary War to the War on Terror. Thank you. I appreciate you having me on. Yeah.
Your notifications if you haven't gotten your notifications. So every time that the Luqman's Coffee Current Events and Politics is on, you would know, so you wouldn't have any excuse. You have your notifications and you know when we're live. And share this with your friends, invite your friends, because we believe that, especially today, we try to bring content. We respect our audience and respect our audience to the point where we don't bring you any BS. We don't bring you any fluff. We don't bring you any type of surface stuff. You know how the Luke minds operate because we respect you. So we do our best to try to get people and subject matters who can really contribute to our understanding of those situations and things around us.
Right. So we had just like I'm glad I checked, had a little audio issue. Our viewers could not hear us, but they could hear Danny. So read Danny's bio again.
I will read it
people
again.
will know who we're talking to tonight.
And it's a pleasure. Danny Haiphong is an activist and journalist who for the last 5 years has been a weekly contributor to the Black Agenda Report. His work was featured recently in former Congresswoman and Green Party presidential candidate Cynthia McKinney latest book, How the U.S. Creates Shithole Countries. He is also the co-author of the recently released book, American Exceptionalism, A History of Fake News.
So, Danny, thanks again for joining us now that everybody can hear us and you. So, all right, we need to get into the meat of this book because we think it is really, really important in the history of how this country is viewed, really. So, I think the first question we want to ask you.
Well, the first question that we would like to ask, because not everybody is familiar with the term American exceptionalism.
Yeah.
So, Danny, if you wouldn't mind, could you explain to us what American exceptionalism is?
Sure. So, American exceptionalism, it's basically the foundational ideology of the United States. It's generally viewed very concretely, but we take a more nuanced analysis of what it is. So we believe American exceptionalism is the ideology that presumes that the United States is a force for good in the world. It usually takes on an offensive character. So what it does is it justifies the war crimes of the United States. It justifies the foundations of the United States and genocide of indigenous people, of the enslavement of African people. And it also creates this cross-class unity among the population in the United States around the interests of the ruling oligarchy of this country, the oligarchy that was responsible for the genocide of indigenous people, the enslavement of Africans, the poverty of working people, and on and on and on into today and what we're facing. And we really wrote this book to disseminate what this ideology is in order to show how important it is to understand it. Because right now, I mean, just look at Joe Biden's opening campaign video, talking about value, saving the values of this country from the evil Donald Trump. We show that not only was this used in 2016 in Hillary Clinton's campaign, this ideology to stake out opposition to Donald Trump, but also it's used to erase our memory about what United States in both corporate parties and the entire ruling class, what it's responsible in doing. And we also talk about American innocence as being the defensive posture. So whenever someone criticizes what the United States does, whether it's internationally, whether it's domestically, in terms of social movements, whatever we may have, whatever it may be, there's this defensive posture that comes out that says, okay, yes, the United States makes mistakes. Yes, there is flaws in this design, but the design is ultimately working toward a more perfect union, basically, with the United States, regardless of whatever bad it does, because its values are noble, because it's, because its intent is good. That means that the United States is salvageable in some way. And we argue that that's just not true.
I love that you brought up Joe Biden's campaign video that he released yesterday, I think, or day before, and because he says in the video, we have to hold true to the values of the founders of America. None of these men were perfect. Thomas Jefferson certainly wasn't. He wasn't perfect, but something like it was something along the lines of diminishing the crimes that Thomas Jefferson committed against Black people in enslaving the descendants of Africans, and of course in raping Sally Hemings. But this idea that you have about erasing the historical memory in respect to the so-called war on terror, how does that fit into the way we view America, like through the lens of the things that Biden said in his campaign video, all the way through to the war on terror and how we've become like complacent in the face of that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. For us, the reason why we started with the war on terror was because the war on terror really signified this crisis, this existential crisis that the United States found itself in 2001, where there was a real crisis of legitimacy bubbling through. The Bush administration was elected after nightmarish Clinton reforms across the board, from criminal justice, foreign policy, deregulating the banks. And the ruling class really needed an enemy. And so we talk about how the war on terror marked a watershed moment in creating an enemy, such as the terrorists, which could be applied to everybody. Every U.S. citizen, non-U.S. citizen, anyone that challenges the rule of capital, that challenges the rule of warfare state, that there was now no need to particularly target specific groups, even though that's exactly what happened. But this notion of the other that was particularly, especially applied to Black people in the United States, Native people, and in particular nations around the world. Now, this idea had to be universalized in order to maintain social control in the home, not only in the home country, but also in the mother country, but also around the world. So this is a watershed moment because we see that the war on terror has morphed now. I think that Russiagate is a logical extension of this war, in that the United States needed another enemy in Russia. And that's what the Democrats now talk about as being, Biden included, Hillary Clinton in 2016. They all talked about why Donald Trump was not in line with the values of the United States. And the biggest one is because he said that the U.S. should have friendlier relations with Russia. And Russia would, because the U.S. has such an interest in making sure Russia is weak. And we talk about this in chapter 16. We see that Russia has become the new bogeyman that logically extended from the endless warfare of the war on terror. The fact that people are pretty sick and tired of losing whatever rights existed, democratic quote unquote rights existing, is losing all of those on the basis of illegitimate wars and endless wars that most people now are coming to terms with just to discuss with them.
Oh, I'm sorry. So now, even though you started with the war on terror, we've been hearing about American exceptionalism. I remember Barack Obama, every president, every politician talks about American exceptionalism. But you highlight in your book that this idea of American exceptionalism isn't new. Like you said, that it's rooted in the founding of this country. What do you mean by that?
So what we mean is that there's always been a mythology in the way that the story of the United States is told, the way that its history is told, that furthers every single objective that the ruling class, because this is, and we talk about it in the beginning chapters, this was a country founded on genocide, founded on slavery, but founded on a racially based capitalism, which, you know, was unique in a sense. While Europe had its racist orientation, none of the empires of Europe were founded upon this racism. So for the first time, whiteness became the foundational root of a capitalist imperialist state. And so since the very beginning, since the United States, since the rulers, the slave owners, the Washingtons, the founding fathers of this, since they've had to tell the story of the creation of this so-called noble country, or this so-called democratic country, they've had to use this myth of exceptionalism. And we talk about the origins myth in particular that Gerald Horne so geniusly delineates in his book about the counter-revolution of 1776. And we talk about how that book and how a lot of work that surrounds it now shows that not only was the origins myth of the United States so dangerous in that it promoted this notion that the US was rooted in these values of democracy and liberty, but also what was actually going on was the opposite of that. It was liberty for some, it was liberty for the oligarchs, it was liberty for the slave owners and the slave traders, while it was oppression, misery, enslavement for Africans. And how the American Revolution was actually a revolution to preserve slavery. So in effect, it was a counter-revolution, and there's a lot of evidence. So basically, we talk about American exceptionalism as being a foundational ideology because all of its components are really stem back to that period, to the very origins of this country.
We're going to jump around, but because there was another point that you brought out too in your book, Danny, where you said, you covered it in your answer previously, but you talked about how American exceptionalism supports white supremacy. And so I mean, so how does it support white supremacy?
Well, the ideology of American exceptionalism supports white supremacy in so many ways. The main way that it supports white supremacy is encapsulating whiteness under the banner of the nation state. And it has done this so imperviously, so deceptively and seductively in a lot of ways, to the point where we're in a period now where this politics of inclusion is everywhere, where this idea that there can be, that Obamas and Hillary Clintons and the rest are now able to represent this noble democratic state through representation, when in fact the very system itself, the United States imperialism and capitalism, are white supremacists to the core. So if you're leading that, you are in effect white supremacists to the core. And that's often missing in analyses of American exceptionalism. And we have a chapter in the book where we really talk about all the ways in which this idea of American exceptionalism is misconceived. And it's chapter 6 about Charlottesville and what the real monuments to white supremacy are. So while there was this whole narrative that Charlottesville was an aberration, that Trump was supporting the white nationalists and how awful that was, and it was very violent and openly disgusting. But what wasn't being talked about was how this very country's structures are rooted in white supremacy. And any ideology that emanates from those structures, like American exceptionalism, is racist. And it is meant to defend white rule, especially the rule of the rich, over the rest of us, and especially those who are deemed the other, people of color, Black people especially. And we talk about what those monuments really are. We need to look at Wall Street as a monument to white supremacy. Wall Street is rooted, as it was some of the first slave markets in New York is where Wall Street originated. And we can talk about the prison industrial complex, the mass incarceration state. That is a monument to white supremacy, given that we can go all the way back to the Black Codes to talk about how incarceration in the United States, the 13th Amendment, defending slavery and the ability to enslave based on a criminal charge. We can go on and on and on, but that's basically the the root of American exceptionalism is white supremacy and its defense. And it does it deceptively. So we don't just talk about, because some people have come out and said, well, American exceptionalism is the idea that America is great, period. But we say that actually it's all the ways in which the system that the United States is ruled by, all the ways in which that system defends itself. And it defends itself through very deceptive means of showing, well, Donald Trump is the bad one. He's the overt racist. Well, the structures in place continue to dominate, to subjugate, to exploit masses of people without much fanfare and resistance.
And before we go on, we're some of our audience members are saying that the sound is going in and out. So
I think you have to speak up, Danny, from your end, because your audio is fading in and out a little bit.
Because this is some good stuff, and we definitely don't want any of this missed.
Sure. Okay.
All right. So you guys out there, Danny's going to speak up. We're going to speak up. Just continue to let us know how the sound is, and we really appreciate that.
So you raised some points that I wanted to kind of touch on a little bit, Danny, about how American exceptionalism kind of presents itself as more than just, oh, America is just great, but it's also like a defensive posture where we're seeing people who are getting offended if you criticize what the United States does. How does this play out from what you've seen in the current election cycle?
When they criticize and say blame America first.
Right.
Wow, yeah, that's a great question. The current election cycle is chaotic, and I think it really reflects this crisis that we talk about and how this innocence is really fading. I remember in 2016 when Donald Trump said, and we cite in the book, that the United States isn't so innocent, when he referenced that Putin, when he was asked about how Russia was, were killers, how there were killers around the world, does he support them? He's like, well, the United States isn't so innocent. I think we're seeing this reflected in the electoral cycle now, that this innocence, this ability to defend the crimes of the United States, its war crimes, its crimes of capitalism and poverty, all of that stuff, all of that is fading relatively to great number of people in the United States. And I think what we're seeing with the Democratic Party, especially because the Democratic Party has become the party of American exceptionalism, it sees this ideology as its only hope to stake out any sort of opposition to the Republican Party, to Trump, because the policies of both parties are relatively identical as in the major areas that most people in the United States are paying attention to, especially working people and poor people who are really trying to figure out if voting for either of them is worth it at all. And so we see Buttigieg coming out talking about values, and then every question he's asked about policy, he doesn't really answer it. He talks about, and then when he does answer it, he gets a lot of flack for it. Like, for example, saying that prisoners shouldn't be allowed to vote. These are monumental errors, but they're errors that ultimately reflect a reality. The same thing with Biden, having to say that the values of the United States are what he's fighting for in opposition to Trump. What he's really saying is, I don't have anything to offer you. I don't have any policies you will like. Black people vote for me because I'm a Democrat, but I wrote the crime bill. I'm not going to talk about that. Don't worry. And we can go on and on and on. But I also think that there's another layer to this in the election campaign, for example, with Bernie Sanders. And now Bernie Sanders represents a real, I think, weapon that the United States doesn't like. I think they see him as a very dangerous candidate because his New Deal politics are totally anathema to the rule of austerity and endless war. Just because something like Medicare for All would require reinvestment and would require basically the erasure of an entire sector of the capitalist class, health insurance and healthcare corporate sector, that's very dangerous to them. But at the same time, he is an American exceptionalist. He believes that the United States needs to get back to the time of the period of World War II and meet the same sort of, meet the same challenges that are being now. And that's also pretty dangerous because Sanders is relatively quiet on things like the military-industrial complex and war. He doesn't really talk about specific issues like that because he knows in order to win an election, that's something you can't do. And so American exceptionalism is dangerous in the sense that even the most progressive elements in electoral politics and even in grassroots politics, we see this a lot. There's a lot at stake that I think people implicitly and explicitly understand when challenging the foundations and origins of this country. And, publishing a book like we did, we knew that it was going to be difficult to promote because when you start bringing up questions of war, endless war, when you start bringing up the origins of the United States as rooted in slavery and white supremacy and how those origins aren't necessarily just a thing of the past, they're living on today. Black people in the United States have accumulated wealth of zero in decades. These issues are living on today. Everyone wants to talk about reparations in the electoral cycle, but no one wants to talk about how this issue of reparations even came to be. Even came to be something that you need to talk to people about. You need to try to, flank towards reparations in order to garner Black votes, because ultimately not only are the afterlives of slavery still living with us, but the Democratic Party is desperate as ever to try to maintain the Black vote, which it has abused and refused to do anything for in terms of a real policy in the last, especially 3 decades.
Now, in terms of foreign policy with American exceptionalism, now today, Jackie, we had spoke about how the United States have not been a very good partner when it comes to, especially under the Trump administration, when it comes to the United Nations. We see how the United States is dealing with Iran and North Korea, now Venezuela, removing the language of the
protecting victims of rape as a weapon of war,
right.
and pretty much just getting that language from the United Nations Declaration on ending rape as a weapon of war, specifically because they think that to take out the sections that mention reproductive health, because in America, white evangelical Christians equate reproductive health with abortion. So in that sense, we're like doing real damage in the world.
So my question is that we know how American exceptionalism plays out on the domestic scene, with our politics and the founding of the country. How has American exceptionalism affected our foreign policy, and what is the results of that?
Great question. There's so much to that question too, and we try to, our book's only 250 pages, but we try to cover as much as we can in that regard. For us, the question of the relationship that the United States has to the world is maybe one of the most important questions. I won't say the most, but it is one of the most important questions that we as progressives, leftists, or just people looking to make the world better than we found it. If we don't address this, then we're not really addressing much, because at the end of the day, what we've seen with the deployment of American exceptionalism around the world is the mission of the United States to achieve full spectrum dominance around the globe. That is what American exceptionalism and Innocence, in effect, have been all about, especially since the end of World War II, when the United States came out of that bloody war, which it shed a lot of, in terms of the United States, it shed a lot of blood in that war against peoples around the world. After World War II, the United States declared a golden age and also declared itself the world superpower. And now that we're in a period where the United States, despite its $750 billion military budget, despite its 800 military bases, despite having thousands of nuclear weapons, despite having nearly having military operations through AFRICOM in nearly every African country, despite overthrowing Ukraine, despite trying to overthrow the government of Venezuela, despite the hostilities toward Iran, trying to overthrow that government, what we've seen is that the United States is actually in a position of decline right now. But that decline is dangerous because the violence, plunder, and the murder has not let up. And so there are many ways that American exceptionalism has justified this. One is through erasure, just through getting our minds and getting the people of the United States to think of the military as something to glorify, to think of war as something that brings freedom and liberty to other people. We saw this during the Obama period, where he basically rewrote international law and said that war was only war when a U.S. soldier died in it. So no war in Libya because the United States didn't have anyone die in that war. He rewrote international law in that sense in order to justify, or in order to make people understand in the United States that they're better than other people. That if as long as they don't die, that's cool, because 50,000, 100,000 Libyans, who knows how many it's been since 2011, but we know that it was at least 50,000 during that 6 months of bombing in 2011. So that has been the result, and there are other ways. And I think some people who read the book might take issue with some of our arguments, because we not only argue that military dominance and the horrific record of the United States in terms of overthrowing governments around the world since 1945, that is defended by American exceptionalism. But what also American exceptionalism does is it defends and justifies the subtle and dangerous aspects of U.S. empire, one of them being the NGO state, the nonprofit industrial complex, the ways in which charity, the ways in which the U.S. exerts soft power over countries, especially a country like Haiti, which we talk about a lot in terms of, it was called the NGO Republic for a long time, still up to this day. Thousands of US-based and European-based NGOs operate in there under the direction of the US puppet government. And to this day, Haitians are making, pennies per hour producing American products, and having their country completely plundered by the IMF and similar agencies, while a puppet government there slaughters opposition groups and ensures that family lavalas and progressives in our country aren't able to take power. This is the reality of American exceptionalism, this idea that the U.S. is a force for good in the world. The reality is not only is the opposite being done, not only is the force for good really a force for plunder and mass murder and subjugation, loss of sovereignty. Not only do all those things happen, but also the script is being rewritten. The way that we understand what's happening around the world is not only so limited, but now we become arbiters of ending this. And we see this just with Tulsi Gabbard, for example. Tulsi Gabbard can't get a minute, even though she, her positions are not necessarily anti-imperialist by any sense, but she can't even get a minute talking about opposing regime change wars, because there's no way you can rewrite that script. You can't, we're doing some good there, because now the contradictions have come to bear that actually people in Syria are worse off than they were before. People in Libya are worse off than they were before. People in Iraq are worse off than they were before. This seems obvious, but and it's coming from the mouth of someone who is in the U.S. military. So there's no glorifying the U.S. military and what it does. And so we're seeing this really complex situation emerge where these ideologies are undergoing a crisis, but at the same time, they're still being deployed. And through erasure, through erasing any alternative narrative, they still are hegemonic in a lot of ways. They still dominate the political landscape, and they still influence a lot of what we do. There's a reason why the anti-war movement is so weak. And one of the reasons is that we can't come to an agreement on the warfare state right now. And that is probably the biggest issue that we face. One of the biggest issues that we face right now is we can't come to an agreement. And it's because so many are confused about what the United States does abroad and are so still willing to defend it, even if they didn't even know that they're defending it.
Well, I'm sorry.
No,
but then we're coming to the end of the segment. But before you go, because you brought up erasure, and you brought up some very good points, man, in what you just said. What And I know it's popular to beat up on the press in this country, but in reality, what role has the press played in this erasure?
Well, the press has really played the role as being another arm of the U.S. state, of the corporate state. It it is basically because six corporations in the United States own 90% of the media. We really only get the message of the military-industrial complex. We really only get the ideas of people like Bezos and the ruling class, the ruling oligarchs of Wall Street. They've basically attempted through desperation, and I think there's a reason why the corporate media has lost a lot of legitimacy in the eyes of most of the American population, other than its most ardent supporters, and that the fact that it's become so partisan, right? You can watch the corporate media and know which political party they are supporting and which side of the intelligence apparatus is being represented. I think what we see with the corporate media is a wholesale lockstep attempt to save American exceptionalism through promoting ideas like representation and the politics of inclusion, through showing that the United States has become more progressive in the areas of having Black faces and white faces, of having people who were historically oppressed now running the show. Yeah, there was a lot of talk about the women who run the military industrial complexes. Progressive development. The corporate media is really dedicated to ensuring that people are misinformed, especially working people, especially poor people. So they run a 24-hour news cycle in order to make as much profits as they can, while they misinform people and pollute the minds of the masses to follow along with the program. That program is believe that the United States is a force for good in the world. And even when the United States does wrong, well, at least you can look at its values. At least you can look toward its history. At least you can look toward a time when it was better. I mean, that's what we're all about right now with the election cycle. Remember, Obama was president, everything was stable. There was no scandal. We all the time. But yeah, we can go through every one of Obama's policies. And if we don't find that to be scandalous in terms of expanding the surveillance state, bailing out the banks, expanding the warfare state, destroying countries around the world, arming jihadists in Syria. If we don't find that scandalous,
right,
then
persecuting
what is our definition of scandal? And who's defining what scandal is? And that's what our book is really all about. Who's really writing the script? And then how does that script affect what we do in our movements, but also just in terms of how we think about what the United States is and what we really need to do to change it for the better and to ensure that we have a revolutionary transformation in this country rather than just a mere reform, which will ultimately strengthen the system. And I think all of the rhetoric around Trump and all of the narratives around Trump, for as bad as he is, I mean, he's a billionaire oligarch, as bad as he is, there is a lot to learn from this moment. And we can't just take away from it that Trump is bad and we need to now elect something that's better, because this idea that there is a better is the problem.
I mean, we could talk about this for the rest of we could talk about this book for the rest of the show, because it is really that full of, I mean, it starts with the War of 1812.
Yeah.
So, and it goes all the way up to examining how we view the war on terror and even today. And so give us the full title of the book again, Hun.
So the full title is...
Oh, sorry, hold on.
Okay. All right, so the full title is American Exceptionalism and American Innocence, A People's History of Fake News from the Revolutionary War to the War on Terror.
And I just have to clarify that when I said Hun, I was not talking to Danny. I was talking, but we're in our middle age, and it's late at night, and we're a little slow.
But right. But before we go, it's something that Danny said about this whole thing of American exceptionalism being rooted in racism.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't, and our show, and everybody who tunes into Luqman Nation know that our show is really, the basis of our show is to give information to a Black audience, mainly a Black audience. Because when we started this platform, we did it because we didn't hear our voices out there. So I say that to say that it is important for us to read and to understand understand what these terms mean, because for Black people to run around and talking about we're exceptional, if you actually knew what that was all rooted in, I think you might want to rethink that. And first of all, before we go, I, how can we get your book? How can the people out there get the book?
Right. So I would say that the best way to get it is through going to Skyhorse Publishing, the website of the publisher. So Skyhorse, SKY Horse Publishing, and you can Google that. I think it's just skyhorsepublishing.com. Search for the book's title, purchase the book through there. They give a bunch of they give like 3 or 4 options. So you get it from an independent source, Amazon, of course, and then Barnes and Noble or whatnot. So definitely go to that website and get it through there. You go to Amazon and they cut the price of the book. And so if you want a cheaper book, to Amazon, but there's a lot of consequences to getting a cheaper book. I think the book for a hardcover is priced pretty reasonably. So I hope everyone can do what they can to get it. And of course, for those who I've given the PDF to, or message me on Facebook, I can make it happen in terms of getting the book. If this is
well, we definitely don't want to shortchange you, Danny. I mean, look, people out there, go please follow the advice and the directions that Danny gave you. Also, this is a very good book for book studies, and I know Jackie and I have been encouraging our audience members and our friends, to really start in your local area. Part of activism, that one of the things about activism is that you can't be a really effective activist unless you are politically educated. Mm-hmm. And so we try to encourage our audience members to get out your shell, get out of the social media bubble, mm-hmm. and go out there, meet people, and start forming these groups so we can educate ourselves on this wonderful work that people like Danny and others have put so much time and effort into. To really encourage and to educate us in these things so that we can be more effective, So and Danny, so what is next for Danny Haiphong?
Well, what's next is so I'm going to be graduating from grad school in like a month, but during the month of May, I'm trying to set up as much as possible in terms of events. It's tough to get I'll be honest, it's been difficult to get the book accepted and responded to with excitement. I think that there's some hesitation. I even got rejected. I mean, I'll tell you guys openly that I got rejected from someone who I go to school with, who works at my school, who owns a bookstore here in the city. And she said that because I'm a man, and anyway, it was a whole thing, but she couldn't have my book in the bookstore, and she couldn't have an event with me because of some identity politics issues. And so so I've been struggling with this. So when I get more time, I'll be definitely scheduled. I would love to come on here. I'm gonna try to get out to DC, do some events there. And but I'm gonna try to do as much as I can this summer to travel with it a bit. And but for the most part, I'm still gonna be writing and trying to spread this. Maybe I'll teach a class with it here in the city. But just trying to get the message of the book out as much as I can, and try to spread the word. Because as you said, political education was really what this book was all about. We wrote it intentionally, so every chapter could stand alone, but at the same time, if you read it all the way through, you would be able to see the themes emerge and be able to connect the dots when it comes to understanding, well, why American exceptionalism is not only fake news, but it's also a weapon that is meant to ensure not only our ignorance, but our complicity and our ability to enforce the very system that a lot of people, I think, and that's what I wrote it to, a lot of people, Black people especially, but a lot of people are becoming sick and tired of the status quo. And that's really what our book is about, is, well, what do we do with that? We have to be able to understand what the status quo is. We have to understand what white supremacy is, what imperialism is, what capitalism is. We have to understand what all of these systems are. And we try to help everyone out with that, because we've tried to study it as much as we can. We have giants like Glenn Ford contributing to it, to be able to, in Ajambo Baraka. So we try to, really spread that education. And we really root it in the spirit of the Black liberation movement, because that is the most progressive, most radical, most revolutionary movement that this country has ever seen. And it will be, and it will continue to be that way until the victory is ensured. So.
Well, Danny, we thank you for joining us, and we hope to have you on again.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely let me know. I would chapters, whatever it may be, just let me know and I'll be back on.
All right.
That's fabulous. We will definitely do whatever we can to promote this book, and we will provide a link to the book to the publishing company so that you all can purchase the book. Do purchase it. It's $25.
Yeah, we don't bootleg here.
Yeah, except for major movies, we will bootleg those.
Yeah, hey.
Thank you so much again, Danny, for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
You guys in Luqman Nation, hang on. We are going to take a short break while we readjust all of our equipment to just talk to you, and we'll be right back.
All right.
Let's get the all right, there we go.
All right.
Hey folks, we have returned. Let me look at the right camera. It's been a long day, and we really wanted to make sure that we got this interview with Danny Haiphong in this book. It's co-authored by Danny, and the other author is Roberto Servizet, I think.
I always let you deal with the names.
And yeah, I probably got that wrong, but yes, I'm going to give you the link to the publishing company so you can get this book. We understand that everybody doesn't just have $25, and if you need a copy of the book, let us know. We'll get in touch with Danny, and we'll see if we can get you a copy of the book. But please support these guys. This is a really amazing, a really great piece of education that we are happy to share.
All right, so we have about 15 minutes left, and so what we really wanted to get into, because this actually ties into the American exceptionalism. We're not too exceptional.
What?
No, we're not. There is an article. Well, there's a study that just came out, and I got it up here. No, I'm not paying for it.
Smithsonian? No.
So anyway, it says that Americans are the most stressed out people in the world, as if we need to be told that. But reporting negative emotions at highest rates in a decade. So basically, there was a Gallup poll that was taken, and it says that Americans experience stress, anger, and worry at levels surpassing those seen over the past decade. Gallup's annual survey of global emotion finds more than half of the United States respondents, around about 55%, reported feelings of high stress the day prior to being polled. According to a Gallup's press release, while 45% say they felt worried a lot of the day, and 22% said the same of anger. American stress levels are significantly higher than the global average of 35%. And we got all of this wealth. Now, you know, mind you now, when we say global, we're talking about the shithole countries. We're even more depressed than them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
How is that
Right.
possible when we're the richest, greatest nation on the planet?
Exactly. So it says, leaving the U.S. tied for fourth alongside Albania, Iran, and Sri Lanka, which they probably have more of a reason to be like that. But in Gallup's, us. In Gallup's rankings of the world's most stressed populations, Greece topped the list at 59%, while the Philippines and Tanzania finished in second and third with 58 and 57% respectively. In terms of worry, the U.S. 45% was ahead of the global average of 39%. Comparatively, 63% of the world's most worried population, Mozambique, reported strong feelings of worry the day prior. Although Americans experienced anger at levels on par with the global average of 22%, this figure was still higher than in years past. On average, U.S. respondents were about half as likely to report strong feelings of anger as individuals from the countries topping Gallup's list of most angry global populations. 45% of respondents from Armenia reported feeling anger, while Iraq and Iran followed closely behind. And Iraq and Iran, they should be angry.
Well, yeah. Iraq and Iran are angry because of U.S. foreign policy, this expression of American exceptionalism.
So, I mean, but if we're so exceptional, then Jackie, then why are we so stressed out?
I think we are so stressed out because I think, as Danny said, we are slowly coming to the realization that the American exceptionalism idea is indeed fake news. That's the biggest fake news that has existed in this country since fake news was a thing. I mean, we've always said on Luqman Nation that this idea of American exceptionalism is a lie.
Yeah.
That the American dream is a lie. It's a pipe dream.
Well,
that,
and we're black, so I mean, very few black people are going to toe that line of American exceptionalism unless they're trying to get a job.
Yeah, right. Then we'll tell the interviewer, yes,
Yeah.
we put our we code switch and we put our inside white voice on, like in
that movie.
Sorry to bother you.
Yeah, sorry to bother you. Yeah.
We'll put our white phone voice on.
Because America has
so we
made
can get
us
the job.
Because America has turned all of us black folks into Sybil.
Yeah.
For those of you who are a certain age, remember Sybil was the woman with different personalities.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, American white supremacy, the white supremacy of American exceptionalism, thank you, Danny, has affected black people, and trust me, the ones who say it hasn't, they're lying, has affected us to the point where black people, for the most part, we have to have these different personalities, one that we deal with amongst ourselves, and one that we deal with when we're around, those who consider themselves or call themselves white in certain settings, because we are a segregated society, still, even more segregated than in times past. And so in order to maneuver, this has been a survival mechanism for black people as we maneuver throughout the society, so we still have that.
Yeah, and because of the white supremacist nature of this idea of American exceptionalism that still operates everything in this society, it's we still need that protection because our workplaces are the result of the foundational white supremacy. Our schools are the result of that foundational white supremacy. Our churches, at everything, everywhere. The only place we kind of feel like we can let our hair down is really in our own homes around our own people. And even in some of our communities, we still have to kind of be on guard because...
Well, I mean, look, I'm glad you brought that up. I don't want to get into that too much, but we got to touch that on that a little bit.
Yeah.
But getting back to why Americans are stressed out, we're overworked, we're underpaid. I mean, look, we did not need this poll to tell us where we live at right now. Where we live at. If I could take the DMV area as a laboratory on Americans, we're fucked. We're fucked up mentally because, you can see it in the way, road rage is at a higher pace.
Yeah.
We're less impatient. We're more angrier. And I think it's because we're working all the time. We're being pushed by this corporate culture. Jackie, one of the things that you said, because I'm a blue collar worker and she's not. And one of the things I asked her was, because they have telework down here, right? Which means people can stay home. They don't have to be on the street. I'm a truck driver. I want you to stay home. So it's like, when her and I first got married, there was a time when on Fridays most people stayed home. They used their telework, and it was beautiful for us truck drivers.
6 years ago?
Yeah, it was beautiful. We look forward to Friday. It was like, wow, Friday, ain't gonna be nobody. That has changed. Yeah. So when I asked Jackie about it, you said to me, you said that that the way that corporate culture has people so stressed out is that people are afraid to use the benefits that they have, and because they don't want to be portrayed as being not a team player or lazy and all those other things.
Right, because the backlash is, most employers will look at an employee who has vacation leave to take or sick leave, and they'll look at somebody who takes that leave and says, well, they don't really want this job. We can find people who do want it, who they're not going to take leave. They're going to take less pay. This really is the corporate culture that has continued to that has continued to grow in this country, so that now, we people don't work toward a pension anymore because we don't have pensions. You have a 401k, and if your 401k doesn't perform well in the stock market, then you could retire with not much, and then you might not be able to retire. So there's all this basic stuff that that emanates from this idea of American exceptionalism that has us literally on the brink of working ourselves to death.
And I like that Danny framed it as fake news, because that's what it is. It's like, and you're right, Jackie, I have to agree with you that we're so pissed off because we realize that this myth of America is false, at least to most of us. And we realize it's false. We're working ourselves to the bone. We don't see any benefits. And if you're and the lower you are on the socioeconomic ladder, it's just more and more of a pile of shit that's just coming on you. Yep. And yet, let's look at this. Now, we talk about our society, but yet aren't we the ones who, we say all the time that, and I don't want to let us off the hook as a society, we allowed it to be this way. Over in France, all the yellow vests and all stuff, all that stuff about that's not the way. Everybody was talking about the French. That's not the way to do it. Protest. Right. That's not the way you protest. Well, guess what?
Destroy property.
Right. Well, guess what? Macron is increasing the pensions of the French workers. Oh yeah, he had the, he had the, because he don't want to seem like he's a total chump. So he told the workers, okay, I'm gonna increase your pension, but y'all gotta work harder.
Yeah,
whatever.
Yeah,
pay
but
me.
The yellow vests were like, see?
Yeah, whatever.
Exactly. They were like, yeah, okay, fine. Yeah, pay me.
So but yet Americans, when all the yellow vest stuff was going on, a lot of y'all was out there saying, well, that's not the way to protest and this and that and the other. Well, you know what? In Greece and in other places like that, when they take to the streets, shit actually gets done. We allow the powerful, we allow the capitalists, we allow the corporate elites to tell us how to protest. Oh no, if you want to protest, yeah, you have freedom of speech, but do it peacefully. They tell you that so they can continue to ignore us. So we're out there and we got our little signs and stuff, and we're being peaceful.
Singing songs.
Yeah, singing songs and going by around the campfire like the Flintstones and all. But at the same time, they're looking out and say, oh, that's cute. They're protesting. But until we get to the point where we get like everybody else, and when we start to go out to the streets, and start getting up in the faces of power, then maybe we can get something going on here. But until then, they're going to keep on taking. And you know what we're going to do? And this is the thing, people. This is the thing that really bothers me in this society, Jackie.
What's that?
Is that, for example, where the French and everybody else, not just the French, we got over there in Algeria where they told the old guy, you got to go.
Yep.
In Sudan, they don't even want military rule. They say, y'all got to go.
And now, as of yesterday, the military, some members of the military joined the civilians in demanding that the military cannot assume power in interim power in between the administrations. That's the power of the people.
But we haven't gotten that. You know why? Because we're too busy worrying about who got this, who's going to get that. They see themselves as French. They see themselves as Sudanese. They see themselves as Algerian. And trust me, they're not all of the same ethnic back. Don't even believe that crap. If you travel, you got Sudanese people that could be classified as white. You got Sudanese people that's as dark as Jackie and I. So I mean, but they consider themselves Sudanese. In America, though, see, the reason why we can't get shit done because see, we're still balkanized. We still, we don't want to advocate for reparations.
Right.
We don't want to advocate for this. We don't want to advocate for that. And so what happens is that the people in power, they keep playing the divide and conquer kind of stuff. So that's why we don't get shit. That's why they bend us over with no Vaseline, because that's how they treat us. And then we come along and we just, say, oh, well, we'll protest peacefully. Danny made a good, excellent point about the anti-war movement. We was down there with the No NATO.
Yep, the No NATO protest.
And as much as we see on the news every day, how close we can be to confrontation with Russia, China, Iran, nuclear war. I mean, all of this stuff is very real stuff. And yet, we just act like it's just not a thing, And thank God, man, that the old hippies are still around, because that's who shows up for these things.
That's true. That is the truth. I mean, it's really difficult. It has been really difficult to organize around the theme of anti-war, but that's why organizations like Black Alliance for Peace exists, so that we can reframe this discussion to especially Black people about why we should be concerned about war. That's why we do the work we do in our church that we're getting some pushback for. But that's like you say all the time, that's the price of admission.
That's the price of admission.
That's the price of admission. That's the price of understanding the stakes and being willing to do the work. It's interesting, and then we're going to take our leave because it has been a long day, and that's the other thing.
It's been a long week.
It's been a long week,
yeah.
and that's the other side of this American exceptionalism issue. That you've got a whole nation of people who are just slowly waking up to this idea that this whole American exceptionalism business was a lie.
Yeah.
It's a fraud. It's all fake news, and they're all freaked out about it. And they're voting for people like Biden because Biden is better than the psycho that's in office right now, and they don't understand that there's this whole history. But there's those people, and then there's people like us, and people who are like us on the other side of that, doing the work to educate, doing the organizing the protests, organizing the teach-ins and the thing. So while the American people who don't understand yet this concept of American exceptionalism being fake news on the one hand are working themselves to death to attain this dream that doesn't exist, there's us on the other end that are working ourselves to death trying to help people realize that they're asleep. And that we activists, we got to do better at taking care of ourselves, because we're it. Unless some of y'all step up to the plate, we're it. So yeah, we got to take our leave in a couple of minutes because we need to get some rest.
Right, and I will leave end with this on my part, is that social media has been a very good vehicle, and it has affected a lot of change. But for real people, in order for us to really affect real change, we got to get out and meet people. We got to get out and talk to people. We got to get out and meet, and we got to get away from. It's good. Social media has been a good tool, but that's all it is. And so and trust me, they're getting ready to shut all this down. Zuckerberg already talking about he getting ready to get hit with a $5 billion fine from the regulatory whoever that's up his ass. And then YouTube is changing their rules where you got to have a certain amount of subscribers in order for them to even want to mess with you. So I mean, these platforms are changing, and it's changing because they realize that people have been using it to affect social change. So the powers that be is like, they shut this down. So we can't, there's going to be a time we're not going to be able to rely on this.
Right.
So people, please, we have to get out of our bubble, organize where you're at, join an organization where you're at, and start to meet people, connect with people. And that's where it begins right there.
That's a great point. Because I think I want to add this to end on that point about getting out and meeting people and connecting with people. Danny brought up a good point about Tulsi Gabbard not being able to even get any kind of airtime on the media because she has a message of anti-war. although Danny said that she is not an anti-imperialist by any stretch of the imagination, and she's not. But those of us who are way farther left than the Democratic Party is, that are way farther left than even Bernie Sanders and a lot of the so-called progressives who support Sanders are, we understand that our message is never going to be heard if the message of an imperialist, anti-war, former military candidate can't even be heard.
Right.
Did I hope you understand what I'm saying? If the media will not even cover anything Tulsi Gabbard says, because she says we need to stop being engaged in all of these wars. She's not saying that we need to pull troops out of everywhere they exist in the world. She's not saying to end AFRICOM. She's not saying to end U.S. interventionism. She's just saying we need to stop creating more wars. And the media won't even listen to her. How do we expect this media to even acknowledge the existence of true anti-imperialist candidates and organizations like in the Green Party and in other outside parties? This is why we need to connect with people on social media, sure, but eventually y'all need to plan to meet people somewhere. Have some events at your house.
Exactly.
Read this book at your house.
Definitely read the book. Get study groups. Study groups are the best way to really connect people. Jackie used to have a small group, study group with the church, and I was a member of a few book studies that people had. They are great ways to meet people. They even have on social media. I know in DC they have where they have meetup.com.
Meetup is everywhere.
Yeah, well, okay, Meetup is everywhere. Where you can go on if you don't have anybody that you're close to in the area or you're new to an area, meetup.com. And you can go and find other people who share the same interest. But we have to start organizing, and it begins with getting books like Danny Haiphong had that we spoke about tonight, as well as others, and really start to politically educate ourselves. That way we won't be so gullible or so vulnerable to the misinformation that we've been given.
So, look, thanks you all so much for joining us tonight on this special edition of Live and Coffee Current Events and Politics in Luqman Nation.
The most dangerous show anywhere.
We know we had a few little audio glitches here and there, but always the playback seems to play just perfectly fine. So if you had issues hearing some of the things that were said tonight, just hold on, play it back tomorrow. I can almost guarantee you it'll be crystal clear. We will provide the link to Roberto Cervizent's and Danny Haiphong's book in the video when we are done, so that you can purchase the book. And stay tuned to Coffee Current Events and Politics in Luqman Nation for whatever we're going to do next, because you never know. I think we're going to be at the Venezuelan embassy tomorrow.
We are, yeah, right. We're going to be at the Venezuelan embassy tomorrow, and we're going to be on. We're going to be the Black Cross. You know, they got the Red Cross, the Red Crescent. Well, the people that's down there, Jackie and I are going to act as the Black Cross. No, the Black Ankh.
That's good. Yeah. I like that.
So we're going to be the Black Ankh,
Ankh,
and we're going to take supplies down there to them. So and that's another thing, people. Please, support our Patreon and all and those things that because we need funds for this. I mean, as you see, Jackie and I are going to Costco tomorrow. And we're going to get stuff to take down to the people, to the embassy, so they can have, refreshment. This is a war.
Yeah.
And see, in war, when you got the soldiers on the front line, they need to be supplied.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
So this is a war. So Jackie and I are going down to Costco's, pick up some supplies, take it to our troops, because that's what they are. Take it to our troops and supply them. But it takes money, folks. So we just ask that if you're not a patron, please become one.
Yep.
And help us in this fight. It's a war. And when we look at it as that, then we can take it more seriously. Because trust me, they look at it as a war.
Oh yeah. What definitely they look at. Oh, that's a whole nother show that we're not gonna do right now. So look, y'all, thanks so much everybody for joining us tonight. Share this video, invite your friends, share the page, and as always, be really good to each other, people. Peace.
Buy the book.
Oh, that's the wrong mouse. I always do that. We got too many mice and too many things going on here.